Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for August 30th, 2024. Well, events are moving extremely rapidly with the war developing or advancing in Ukraine against Russia. It's clear from the Kursk incursion that the pro-war faction of the oligarchy, which is the City of London, Wall Street, Brussels crowd, that they're committed to dismantling Russia. And that's what this is all about. It has nothing to do, as we say, with freedom or democracy for Ukraine. They're prepared to sacrifice to the last Ukrainian, the last Pole, the last German, for the sake of destroying Russia. And that's what people refuse to recognize, that this is not about a standard fight for territory, for boundaries, for ideas. The idea behind it is to destroy Russia. This is an old idea that goes back to the British Empire. Now, it's more obvious than ever that at the same time, a new paradigm is being built. And it's being built through the work of the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, nations of the Global South, on ideas that have been around since the 1970s of a new Bretton Woods. And these are even being voiced by people such as Robert F. Kennedy right now. These initiatives are underway. They're slow, they're taking time, but it's also clear that the people behind them are being targeted. The countries behind them are being targeted, including Egypt as a new member of the BRICS, including Iran as a new member of the BRICS. And so this is a battle which is going to continue and which requires the activation of the citizens of the West to step in against their establishment, against their oligarchy, and to wage this fight. Now, if you're aware of what I just said, then you should plan to participate today at 11 a.m. Eastern Time in the weekly International Peace Coalition meeting that will be taking up these questions and discussing how can we organize to bring the West, the nations of Europe and the United States, into supporting this new paradigm and breaking with the unipolar order, which is not in the interest of the country or the citizens of any country. It's in the interest of an oligarchy, which is committed to the idea of a unipolar order. So look in the description section of today's update for information on how to participate in the International Peace Coalition meeting today. Now, since it's Friday, I'm taking your questions, and there are two questions from viewers that I want to take up. One from a regular contact in Wisconsin who asks the following question. She writes, given the escalation to suppress open discussion and free speech, and she referred to the attacks on the Telegram CEO, the Rumble CEO, Scott Ritter, Richard Medhurst. She goes on to say, could you review who is behind the attacks on LaRouche in the 1980s, what he was jailed for, and what we can learn from his case? Now, this is a very important question because we just heard that President Trump has announced that he will be, if he's elected, he will be giving Robert Kennedy a commission to investigate the assassination attempt against him, but also the assassinations in the 60s that were carried out by most likely networks associated with the City of London, the intelligence community, NATO, Operation Gladio, including assassinations in Italy and elsewhere. And there were assassinations all over the world by these people, but they were covered up. And so the question then is, will President Trump give Robert Kennedy a free hand to fully dig into these operations, who is responsible for them, and how it was covered up? Because if so, this is the opportunity to expose why they did this, what their intention has been, and to bring them down. Now, in the case of LaRouche, he first came into prominence especially in the early 1970s, when the United States, under Nixon, broke the dollar reserve system from gold and ended the Bretton Woods system. LaRouche warned that this would end up with a Schachtian policy, that is a fascist economic policy of deindustrialization, that would end up putting the nations of the world on a course toward war through the destruction of the idea of sovereignty and physical economy. And for this, he drew the wrath of then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. LaRouche began the real anti-IMF movement of the 70s in 1975, 1976, with his proposal for an international development bank. What happened at that point is a coalition of forces from the City of London, working through the Washington Post's Katharine Graham, and an investment banker in New York City named John Train, set up a task force, a Get LaRouche task force, which included the Anti-Defamation League, which is very famous today for proclaiming that anyone who's against Israel is an anti-Semite. They brought in people such as William Weld of the White Weld Investment Bank in Boston, Robert Mueller, who later became famous during the Russiagate hearings. Mueller was one of the prosecutors of the LaRouche case. And in particular, it was kicked into a whole new level when Ronald Reagan turned to LaRouche and his idea of the Strategic Defense Initiative as a way of achieving a relationship with the Soviet Union that would move toward détente rather than military confrontation in Europe. And this was the idea of using new physical principles as anti-missile defense system. That was LaRouche's idea. Reagan liked it, deployed LaRouche to discuss it with the Soviets, and the Soviets eventually rejected it. But it caught Kissinger and others off guard, and they made a determination that they were going to finish off LaRouche. And they used a combination of media, of groups such as the Anti-Defamation League, key people in the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, such as Edward Bennett Williams, top oligarchs, as John Train was, who moved to create the basis for jailing LaRouche. And what was the charge that he was convicted of? Conspiracy to defraud the Internal Revenue Service. And they gave him a 15-year sentence. And former Attorney General Ramsey Clark said that this was, to his knowledge, the greatest example of government persecution of an individual that he had ever seen. Now, what's interesting then is this is the very same network that 30 years later launched Russiagate. The very same network, in some cases the same people, such as Mueller. And the Russiagate story was the same kind of fraud, as LaRouche was accused by some of being a Soviet agent. Others called him a Nazi or anti-Semite. But it's the same network that targeted Donald Trump after his nomination in 2016 with Russiagate. So that's why if you dig into the case, the LaRouche case, what you'll find is the evidence that he was targeted by the same International Assassination Bureau that killed John F. Kennedy, that killed Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, as well as leaders across the world. And that's the way we're going to bring down, at least through exposure, create the basis for bringing down the so-called deep state, the permanent bureaucracy in the Justice Department, in the State Department, and so on. So if Robert F. Kennedy is allowed to investigate this, well, this could be a turning point in the history of our republic. Now, the second question is, does any government take the Zelensky peace plan seriously? And there's a report that he's going to bring it to the United Nations General Assembly in September. Look, Zelensky is a puppet. His peace plan is essentially a war plan for dismantling Russia. There's no legitimacy to it. The whole question of Crimea is a fraud that was a product of the 2014 coup that was run by people like Victoria Nuland under the direction of Joe Biden by the Obama administration, that was, again, a commitment to isolate Russia and to create a hostile force on Russia's border, which would be integrated into NATO, which would be a security threat to the Russian state. Now, Zelensky's idea that somehow there's great support for this internationally is just wrong. There's support for it in the NATO capitals that are under the domination of the Anglo-Americans. There's support for it with the Warhawk faction of the military-industrial financial complex in the United States. But that doesn't represent the interests of the American people any more than NATO represents the protection of the people of the nations of Europe. In fact, the nations of Europe are being destroyed by the operation that's been run to defend Ukraine. And where's the democracy in Ukraine? Zelensky, his term is over. He canceled elections. He shut down opposition. It's a fraud. And when he's promoted by the Western media, people around the world look at this and say, this is another fraud. And so it's going to go nowhere in the UN General Assembly, but it will be used in conjunction with the continuing Kursk incursion or whatever they choose to do next with long-range missiles and so on to carry out attacks against Russia. And that's why this situation is so dangerous. Because no matter what the rest of the world thinks, and most of the world is opposed to this funding of this war to protect the puppet Zelensky, it doesn't matter. The oligarchy is going ahead with this, as a collapsing empire always adopts policies which not only threaten their enemies, but also their own people. So that's why the international peace coalition that we've set up is so important. And I urge you, read the material we have on this, the weekly reports on the Zoom calls, and become a part of it, and help us build a council of reason to defeat the council of war. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again on Monday. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.